Should you be saying anything less than complimentary, it was better to be quiet. No, we don't have to. Okay. Sure. Well, yeah, easily.
10 seconds? Okay. We're pretty flexible here.
Yeah, we are pretty flexible. I'll just talk for a little bit. This, as we get started this morning about some of the conversations that have been happening around the Pope's coming to Canada this summer, and thinking all of what's involved in making that happen. It's really been, a conversation that's been going on for years, and now seems like it's closer to becoming a reality, even though the Pope hasn't been that well. And then deciding, where is he going to go? And is he going to go to, my thought was, well, for sure he's going to go to Kamloops. Yeah. Given the discovery of the unmarked graves coming up just about a year at the end of this month. But I guess there's trust that behind the scenes somebody's making good decisions about all of these things. And also both kind of fearful and hopeful maybe at the same time about what might come from his being in Canada for a few days. And it makes me think particularly about this place. Welcome to Swallowfield Farm, and this is home for Jenny and I, and a place that we were able to enjoy raising our 4 boys, and now I love having our grandchildren out here and sharing it as widely as we can. One of the things that's always sort of in conflict with those feelings is the reality that we are on the unceded ancestral territories of the Kwantlen, the Katzie, the Matsqui, and the Semiahmoo First Nations, and recognizing that there's so much that needs to happen in order to bridge the deep hurts, the damage that is intergenerational, and the scars that are still so visible and evident. And I know one of Betty's hopes for this artwork is that it be a healing place and an opportunity for conversations to be open. And I think that's what we're going to experience in some small ways again today. So I'm going to pass the microphone over to Ellen, and she's going to introduce today's events and speakers.
Thanks, Dennis. And good morning, everyone. It's a lovely, beautiful, sunny, cheerful day here, so you're in the right place. We're going to start our panel on storytelling this morning with a video presentation, which was created by Zach Running Coyote. So I am here in place of Betty this morning. Betty sends her regrets to everyone. Unfortunately, she was diagnosed with COVID at the beginning of the week. She's had a mild version and she's recovering at home and hopes to be back in the saddle by tomorrow. So we're all hoping and praying that she will have a quick recovery and be right back into the thick of things soon. In the meantime, since she couldn't be here in person, she wanted to show this video clip. Zach couldn't be here either, but this video clip of him dancing and singing what he has called Moon Kin, with its wonderful juxtaposition of an indigenous expression in relation to nature poised in an urban setting, underlining the difficult identity relation of culture and place. So Andrew is going to play that video for us. Beautiful. I think that looked like a very precarious balancing act, which ties in very well with our panelists today. We have today with us Patrick Scott, Betty's cousin. Patrick went to the Northwest Territories as a CBC cameraman to document the Burger Pipeline stories in the 70s. He stayed and has lived and worked in Canada's North for 4 decades, currently in Yellowknife. His career has included journalism, film production, community development, and Indigenous claims negotiations and implementation. He, with his wife Gabrielle, have 8 children and 12 grandchildren. All are Tlicho, is it Tlicho? Citizens. He has authored 2 books in response to and support of his community, Stories Told and Talking Tools. He will talk today about the importance and nature of story in this community he is now a part of. Fern Gabriel was also going to be on our panel today, but unfortunately, Fern, who is from the Kwantlen First Nations Reserve, just over on McMillan Island here, part of our, well, everyone I think met Fern at the opening. She did an amazing job of storytelling at that event. Unfortunately, she has COVID, so she could not attend today. Totally unrelated to Betty's exposure, and nonetheless, it seems to be a little bit rampant in the community right now. So Fern will not be joining us. Steve Bynum is also here with us today. Thanks, Steve. He comes all the way from Chicago. Let's give a big shout out to the Windy City. He's been a broadcaster for public radio there for many years, interviewing many people with unique stories of identity in American culture. You can read his full bio in the program. Today, he's going to share some thoughts about Black lives. And on Wednesday the 18th in the afternoon, the small talk session will expand that to his personal history as a Black American. We also have Angela Conrad, and again, we're going to have a video presentation from Angela. She's a director, teacher, and dramaturge who has been working in theater for more than 20 years. She's been nominated for several Jesse Richardson Theater Awards, winning once for Outstanding Direction and 3 times for Outstanding Production. She is artistic director of Dark Glass Theater, for whom she curates and hosts the ongoing storytelling series Trespass. Her longtime day job as professor of theater at Trinity Western University will soon be ending as the university is closing the theater department. Boo! Sorry, but okay. That's a whole nother story, I guess. Leaving Angela to ponder what she wants to be when she grows up. The story she will tell us today. So these are our panelists. A very warm welcome to you, and thank you.
Thank you so much. There were 4, and now there are 2. And well, first of all, I want to thank Betty. I want to thank everyone who put this incredible event together. This is an extraordinary endeavor, and knowing Betty as I do, only Betty could do it.
Yes.
She spoke to me about a year ago or more about wanting to do this. Some of the artwork that she's displaying over there I saw 2-3 years ago. And knowing that in an artist's mind, as all of you know who are content creators, something is fixed, it's in your soul, and it hasn't quite given birth, but you see it. You can project forward in time, and then many of us, most of us, can't see what the artist sees. But now, witnessing all of this, I wouldn't even call it a culmination because she's never done creating, but it really places the words that she spoke to me a couple of years ago around this art. The words have now fallen into my heart. So story, which is part of what I do for a living, story, something that I'll expand upon on a more personal level later on this week. Quite simply is reality itself. I think, therefore I am. What does that actually mean? It means, it harkens to the words that we use to define place and presence and person, situation. And so if we can't speak something into the world, into the universe, then it really doesn't have much meaning if it's just locked or fixed within ourselves or within an object. So that when we look at a piece of art, it's not enough just to admire its beauty. Beauty is intrinsic. Beauty is innate. Beauty is self-apparent, and it has to speak to us. Well, it does speak to us. We have to hear it. We have to listen. And so when I think about my life as a Black man on the North American continent, I think about how story and narrative have determined destiny and also determined place and personhood. So I think it's really important to state that never has there been a time in my lifetime where story has done so much to determine the fates of others, how we tell those stories, for whom we tell them. I was born on July 9th, 1967, on the south side of Chicago. On a Sunday afternoon, I came into the world at about 3 p.m. Why does that matter to me? I don't know. When I think back to that moment, which I didn't witness because I was a baby, but I feel like I was a part of it. I see myself watching that story unfold when my 17 just turned 18-year-old mother was going into labor. And my family was on their way from church or to church, and it was sunny. I don't know if it was sunny, but I say that it was. And I see the sunshine reflecting through this 1960s Mustang. And I see my mom groaning, oh, and my grandfather, Cleveland, who was the sweetest human being that ever walked the face of the earth, but you wouldn't know it because toxic masculinity demanded that he not show his emotion or express himself. And as a black man, that could be considered a fatal weakness. But no one was more worried than he was, even though he didn't speak much. And we're driving along one of the streets in Chicago, maybe Cottage Grove Avenue, on our way to the University of Chicago. My grandmother, near tears, she's apoplectic with worry. And we arrive at the hospital, and then my mother's taken away, but you're not allowed to be with the mother during that time. It's not appropriate. So my grandparents raised me, so they were my parents too. Another story. And they go in hoping that their daughter and their grandson will come out. And he does. Except there's a complication. He's not coming into the world the way that he should. So the doctor reaches in with this metal object and he grabs my head and he begins to twist and turn and pull. And I'm resistant. Why do I resist? I resist because intuitively I know that I'm coming into a world that considers me an existential problem. By the fact that I breathe, suck in air, I'm a problem to be solved. I am a societal concern. And so the doctor grabs too hard, causing this lump, lipoma, that's still on my head, causes my ears to shift. If you look closely, one ear is out, one ear is pushed in, one is higher than the other. And that putting on of hands by that white doctor to contort me, to disrupt me, to contaminate me, is the essence of my black life. And then, you can't wait to hear it, can you? That is story. Ira Glass, a famous producer and show host, This American Life. The essence of story is not the structure of the story. It's not even the content of the story. It's just the ability to tell you what happens next because you want to know what happens next. It could be the most mundane thing about just going to the store. But if you talk about a progression of events, one after the other, and then what happened next, and then I grabbed my keys, and I walked out the door. Then I got into the car. I tried to start the car. The car took a second, but then it started, and I was on my way. Progression. My life as an African American is about progression. It is about our mother, Africa, the mother of humanity. It is about the treatment of that mother over time. It is about the stealing away of children from our mother. It is about the rape and pillage of our mother, the great extraction from our mother, the disregard of our mother, the turning away from our source of life. So what happens when you turn yourself from the source of life? When you are disrespectful or indifferent to your mother? well, we all know what happens in families when that happens. And so there is a great reconciliation and restoration that must take place. We must make peace with our mother. We must make peace with what was done to the children of this land, the original children of this land, who themselves were not even original because they came across a great land bridge called Pangea. And then we all scattered into what became the continents. But the people who were here first to make that peace. I am accountable as a black man for that theft of First Nations and indigenous people. I have a responsibility. I am accountable. It is not enough to say, I did not do it. It is not enough to say, I am not racist. Restoration and healing have to do with the act of creating space, of applying the healing oil and salve to the injury, to the wound. The wound does not ask about its source. The wound begs to be healed. And so even within my black life, I know I have an obligation to my indigenous brothers and sisters, because until that wrong is made right, there will be no peace on this continent. Until the wrong is made right of the alienation that was caused by the Middle Passage when millions of us died on our way to these lands, there will be no peace. Until there's a connectivity amongst the diaspora of people who look like me, because only a small percentage of Africans in the slave trade actually came to the continental United States, only about 4%, 4 or 5%. Most people don't know that. They went to South America, displaced within Africa, they went to Europe, they went to other places. And so story is what creates the bridge to which that connectivity and healing can occur. Words, which are the most devalued currency, especially today. The power of words, the danger of words, the good danger, the good trouble of words. I think of it as like a penny. We toss pennies around like they're nothing. And a penny by itself, you would think not much value or worth, can it do much harm? If I take that penny and I hit you in the eye with it, it causes a great deal of harm. If I gather those pennies in a sock, swing it around and hit you, they cause great harm. If I put 1,000,000 pennies together, those pennies have great value and worth and can do much harm. Words, in a similar fashion, operate that way. What we speak into reality is forever and defines us as a person, as a group, as an ethnicity, as a nation, as a species. And so when I think about my black life, I think about words. I think about how words were utilized to devalue and dehumanize me, and make it easy and possible to subjugate and enslave me. I think that if the head of the Roman Church can put out a papal encyclical stating a justification for my enslavement, then everything filters down from that. I think that if an African American, let's say my son, my 25-year-old son, who is as well-behaved and wonderful a human being as you'll ever meet on the face of the earth, if he's pulled over by a police officer and there is some type of exchange, the rooster speaks, and results in his death or results in his injury, the words that he speaks do not hold weight. He requires a person who is white, or a person who is not black, or an authority figure to validate his words and his value. And so what I see as a transition and a shift and a change is that we as Black people no longer wait for our stories to be validated. They have worth and value, and they are meaningful simply because we speak them. And there's a term that's thrown around called anti-racism. And that term is important because what it says is that it differentiates between one who does not hold racial animus within themselves and one who says that I see a structural, historical problem, and I am obligated to disrupt it, crush it, disintegrate it for the sake of justice and restoration. And so to say that I am not racist and to give a narrative as to why an individual is not racist is one of the more inconsequential exercises I can think of. If you see hurt and harm being done in the world, and you feel a connection to the people who are being harmed, then your humanity demands that you act. And if you fail to act, then you are complicit. On my way here with my friend David Goa, we were having breakfast, and we passed a pickup truck. And on the pickup truck was a Canadian flag. I said, "Oh, look, how cute, patriotism." David said, "No, that's not what that means." Well, what do you mean? What else could it mean? It is solidarity with the January 6th insurrection at the US Capitol. And I'm thinking to myself, why would a flag of one's country have anything to do with that? Well, that was a dumb question, because there were many American flags flying around at that moment. It saddened me and it frightened me in that moment we walked into the restaurant and there were Canadian flags everywhere. Not unusual, but then I began to wonder, is this a symbol of Canadian pride? Or is that your version of the Confederate flag? A symbol of terrorism in my country. Hundreds of thousands died because of that flag. A president of ours was assassinated because of that flag. And so now this country that I have such a deep affinity and love for, Canada, when I come here, now when I see the Canadian flag, I can't know for certain if it's a symbol of identity or if it's a symbol of potential terror. And the stories that now will be told around that flag will shift forever. It will impact the way that you look at yourselves and look at us and look at me, because that insurrection on January 6th was more than just about political turnover. It was about anxiety, fear, and rage towards a changing world and a desire to retreat to what is perceived as a safer time and place. There's never been a safe time or place for anyone who looks like me. Never. And there never will be in my lifetime. So now, the story of my life as a Black man, the story of the lives of Black people, the story of how our bodies were destroyed, as well as our minds. I'm wondering if we could tell a different story. I'm wondering if rather than looking at pieces of cloth or statues or any various other symbols that we have, why not look at the greatest symbol of all, the human being that, according to my faith tradition, contains within them the image and likeness of God and is divine and precious and sanctified and holy, complete, lacking nothing, unless we are no longer in communion, unless we are not unified, unless we don't love one another. Look at this living icon of a living God and see reflected your own beauty, your own care to be cherished and protected. And so if we can tell that story and think less about objects and think more about beauty, humanity, empathy, sacrifice, co-suffering love, which are reflected in the arts so wonderfully over time, to tell those very difficult stories and tales, and to do so in a way that penetrates the heart and the soul and can transform us. I think that through the arts, we have the key, the pick that can unlock an explosion of joy, togetherness, unity, and progress. Finally, and sure Patrick and I will talk back and forth on this as well. For me, as a person of color, there is a new story that has to be told. That story is based on the reality that we are a global majority and not an ethnic minority. There are a lot more of us than there are of you who are not us. And if we hold on to that reality and embrace global citizenship, global belonging, and become more broad and universal of our mindset, it will transform our conversations. Because there's so many in the world who look like me, who want to connect with me, but they don't know me. But we exist in isolation, so therefore, we're able to be controlled and dominated. And so that story, more broadly, that all of us as human beings are on this journey of discovery, but then that also, there are so many wonderful answers that can come from different parts of the world to take a critical look at capitalism, a critical look at the pursuit of happiness as it's described, but that's tragically done so at the expense of others. That is the essence of my story, that I am chattel or a commodity to be traded. 200 years ago, it was my body. Today, it is my mental welfare, or my ability to provide for my family, or my ability to bring my full authentic self into reality and be fully present for those who would hear what I have to say. So I thank you for hearing part of my story. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you very much. It took me on a different path than I thought I would be on this morning, so Thank you. As Steve started, he thanked Betty and all those involved in creating this event. So I thank them as well. I thank you for being here to listen. I'm cold. I came from Yellowknife where the snow just disappeared in our backyard last week, and I didn't think I'd be cold, but even though it's above zero, it's cold. Steve has triggered all kinds of thoughts for me. He mentioned stories need to be told. We need to liberate our stories by telling them. And in some senses, our community, as well as ourselves, will not find the peace that our souls long for until we tell our stories. But in telling our stories, what's really important is that we are heard. And so often, people tell their stories and no one hears them. And they feel violence. They feel oppressed and devalued. I was going to end my comments today with a statement that I don't know if any of you have ever heard of Richard Rohr. He's a Franciscan monk who lives in New Mexico. And he has a daily meditation that he emails out. On May the 1st, I want to read a little bit of what he wrote. Steve talked about violence. We really do live in a time of incredible violence. And we've heard too much of false news. Stories that are lies instead of truth. And that's a real deep sense of violence, a violation of every one of us. My background as a journalist with CBC taught me that you don't tell the story until you at least have two sources to confirm that it's true. One source is not enough. And in today's world, we learn from social media all kinds of things that we have no idea what the source is, but we accept it. So we live in a very dangerous time, and we see that in the violence that is being experienced globally with the Russian war, or is it a military operation? And we disengage because we don't know what to do, because we live in fear. We live in fear that Putin will start a nuclear war and it will actually impact directly on us. How do we counter that lie when that story has become so common globally? Anyways, let me meander back to Richard Rohr, because he's talking about violence, and he says, who are we? Who are we? Our true selves in God/Creator, which is always beyond any nationality, religion, skin color, gender, sexuality, or any other possible labels. In fact, we finally can see that those are always and only commercial labels. Interesting term to put on the identifiers that we often use in our world today to describe who we are. They're only commercial labels. When we become little enough, naked enough, and honest enough, then we will ironically find that we are more than enough. At this place of poverty and freedom, we have nothing to prove and nothing to protect. Here we can connect with everything and everyone. Everything belongs. This cuts the violence at its very root before there is any basis for fear or greed. As I thought about doing this seminar, I just found that really quite profound when I thought about the stories that I've experienced, the life I've experienced in the Northwest Territories. And I want to just, I don't know, yeah. I'm going to show a few images as I go along. And as you heard, I moved north in 1975, actually, as a cameraman producer for CBC to do Indigenous language programming, first television programming in the Indigenous languages that CBC had done in anywhere in Canada. We worked in 5 languages. I was there for 11 months, and somehow 47 years later, I'm still there. And that's part of my story, and I'm going to share part of that with you. The North is really in the people of the North. And when the introductions were done, we were told we were on Indigenous lands. And the North is about the land. The people are about the land. Edward Chamberlain, who is a professor at U of T, published a book which is entitled, If This Is Your Land, Where Are Your Stories? And in the book, he describes the confrontation between some Gitsen elders and logging company officials who have gotten a permit to log Gitsen lands. And an elder confronts the management of the logging company and says, what are your stories of this land? These ancestral lands are who we are. These are the source of our stories. Can't read that one, so I won't leave it up. When the Burge Inquiry started, it became more than it was supposed to be. The Burge Inquiry, if you're not familiar with what it was, and I believe that it actually profoundly changed the country, because Berger was charged with looking at the possibility of constructing a 4-foot diameter gas pipeline from the Beaufort Sea, the Arctic coast, down to Alberta that would connect to the pipelines feeding the United States with gas. There were 2 proponents, Arctic Gas and Foothills Pipelines, and he was supposed to look at this and make recommendations to government on which proposal was acceptable. But one of the things he committed to do was to go to all the communities and listen to the people. And it really made a huge, huge difference to this country, particularly to the North. Stories really form and reflect our identity. And our identity defines our place, and our place is the foundation of our stories. And I had the honor and privilege of listening to people from every community in the Northwest Territories talk about their place, talk about who they were in context of how they lived on the land. Most of us are settlers. We've been here a few generations, but our stories aren't rooted in these lands. Our stories are rooted elsewhere. We've landed. This is an aerial shot landing in Yellowknife. So, who am I? Who are you? What's your story? Well, I've had all kinds of labels thrown at me. I lived in a community called Fort Simpson for 8 years with my family, and it's a 7-hour drive from Fort Simpson to Yellowknife. And in between, there's basically one community. It's Fort Providence. And the priest there was a good friend, and he had been the priest in Fort Simpson. So one time when I was driving from Fort Simpson to Yellowknife, I stopped to say hello to him and have a cup of tea with him. And after we finished our tea, we came outside, still chatting, and standing beside our car. It was a beautiful, sunny afternoon, talking away, and 4 little kids came running up and looked at Father, his name was Camille, looked at Father Pichet, Father Camille, said, "Father, who's that? Who's that?" And he looked at them, and he looked at me, and he said, "Jesus." That's what I looked like then. And then the kids' eyes popped and they ran. And I looked at him and said, "I'm leaving. I don't want anybody coming back looking for Jesus." Who am I? What is my identity? Is it my ethnic background? Is it my faith? Is it my place of birth? Is it where I live now? In part, yeah, it's all of those things. But for me, it isn't about the land. I'm displaced. My ancestors are displaced people. And that's the common term now, is that we're settlers. My wife is Clincho. So it's very different for her. Who is she? Because she's rooted in the land. That's my wife. And that flag beside her is the Clincho flag, representing their identity, a reflection of their land and their communities. There are 4 Clincho communities in the north. Their identity is locked to the place where they are. And they believe very deeply that God, the Creator, placed them there to be caretakers. So when we hear about ancestral lands, we're hearing about a covenant between a people and the Creator. And that covenant is for care and good keeping. When last year, 1921, was the 100th anniversary of Treaty 11 for the Clincho people and the people of the Mackenzie Valley. And they signed that treaty, and there's plenty of history around treaty. The Dene people thought they were signing or agreeing to a peace and friendship treaty. And in their minds, and they still tell this story, that it was a relationship that they were establishing with the settlers who were coming, that they would live in unity and help each other out, as long as the river flowed and the sun rose. That's what the treaty was for them, and is today, 100 years later. Of course, for the Crown, it was entirely different. It was about oppression. It was about stealing land. Treaty 11 was created because someone had found oil at Norman Wells on the Mackenzie River. And the only way Canada, the Crown, knew how to access it within the context of Canadian law was to create a treaty so they controlled the land. Gabriel's people are from the tree line area. So they're called the people of the edge of the tree line. So our children are known to be those people, a people of the tree line. Come back to me. When our oldest son was born, his name is Amos, my identity changed. In our world, in the Western world, our children are identified by their parents. Amos is my son. Betty is my aunt's daughter. In the Denny world, it's reversed. As soon as Amos was born, I was known in the community as Amos Wada. Amos Wada. Wada means father. I became Amos's father. That was my identity. He wasn't my son. In context of the community, I was his father. I find it really a fascinating, subtle worldview difference. Because when elders talk and political leaders amongst the Dene talk about making decisions for the community, they talk about making decisions based on the seventh generation. 7 generations away. Is this decision today going to work for them? Can we make a decision that we're comfortable with for 7 generations? Whereas in our society, Steve touched on this, that's not our motivator. Capitalism, profit, simply put, greed. That's the foundation of our society, whether we like it or not. And that's what we have to, we live in a time when we talk about reconciliation, and we're talking about reconciling with Indigenous people who have a total different view of the world. How do we let go of our values that we know have been oppressive? Not only for the Indigenous people, but they oppress us as individuals. When we live in a way that is to profit our own and live in excesses, we now know that it's impacting everything around us. So we have climate change. We see gas and oil prices go sky high. So the oil companies are making record profits. So why are they going sky high? Because our motivation is for profiteering. That's a shot of my family. Thank you. Gabe and I have 8 children, 6 girls and 2 boys. We now have 13 grandchildren, 12 living. So my oldest son, Amos, is a father and an independent filmmaker. My oldest daughter, Uri means spruce bough, is a mother and an architect living in Vancouver. And the reason why my wife wanted to call Uri Uri is because my wife grew up in the bush. She lived in a tent until she was 8 years old. And the floor of the tent is spruce boughs. So she would go into the bush with her grandmother and her mother collecting spruce boughs on the cycle of when they had to replace the spruce boughs to make sure the tent was clean and comfortable. And so that was a childhood activity that was critical to their lives when she was young. And that had significance, and it was tied to the land. So Uri got that name. Her parents moved from their bush camp. Gabriel is the fourth child in her family. Her three older siblings were whisked away to residential school. And I won't say anything more about residential school, I don't think. But her father did not want to lose another child. So he changed his life and his family's life from being out in the bush, and they moved into the community of Betchicon. And rather than being a hunter and trapper, he became a delivery guy on a water truck for years. And he hunted and trapped part-time. So he did not lose another daughter to residential school. That was his motivation. And so my wife grew up in a very different way than her older siblings. Not to bore you, but I want to tell you about each one of my children, just very briefly. Benjamin, who also lives in Vancouver, runs an organization to help young entrepreneurs in Indigenous communities across northern Canada, Nunavut, Northwest Territories, and Yukon, develop the skills to help them be successful. And a good deal of the work that he's been doing over the last 5 years has been trying to rethink economic development from profit-making to community, based on a holistic, community-based, value-based methodology. I find it really remarkable what he's doing. And he's being supported by Shopify, ironically. My next child her name is Dega. Dega is a mother, and she's involved in developing a doula program for northern families. If you live in a small community in the Northwest Territories and you're about to have a baby, you have to fly a month before your due date to Yellowknife in order to birth. It doesn't matter if you have one child or 5 children, you have to leave them behind. And the Northern Birthwork Network, her and another woman are trying to develop this so that midwifery and support for women is community-based. And it's rooted in her family because her grandmother was a midwife. But it was made illegal in the Northwest Territories. Dega, de is water, river, means by the river, by the water. We called her Dega because we had moved to the community of Fort Simpson when Gabriel was expecting Dega. And we lived on the riverbank, so it seemed appropriate to call her by the river. My next daughter is Dati. She's a mother, and she advocates for environmental land rights and indigenous land rights, and she's created a guardian program for the Dutcho people, and doing just actually quite remarkable work in the whole area of conservation and land rights amongst Indigenous people and young people. So she's helping bring elders and young people together and getting them out on the land to protect and learn the land. Because families don't go out like my wife experienced when she was young as much. Itwa, Dati, by the way, means morning dew. Itwa is also a mother, 2 children, and works in philanthropy and Indigenous rights as a mentor to community groups. Her name means little flower. She's a beautiful soul, caring, hardworking, intelligent. It really did fit her and continues to fit her. My next daughter's name is Sataklo, and we always have shortened it to Saklo because it's easier to say, but it means dancing sun. The sunrise. And she's an artist and still a student, doing all kinds of work, including film production. She's actually shooting a film this week of a film about birthing that she and another woman wrote the script to. My youngest daughter's name is Jawa. And since 2016, Jawa has run a coffee shop in Yellowknife with my support. We're co-owners of it. Jawa means blueberry. And she's won a number of awards since opening the shop. And thank God we survived COVID. Our shop is called Birchwood Coffee Co. And Co means home in Clincho. And we called it that because we wanted to create a space, not unlike this space, that welcomes people. That people can come and share their stories and feel comfortable and enjoy a cup of coffee. So it's become a really vibrant community place. And we hope it survives ongoing. So that's the clan. The elder you see there is the former chief of Katlodee First Nations, Roy Fabian. And you may have watched the news in the last couple of weeks, or the last couple of days, I should say, and seen stories about Hay River and Katlodee First Nations being flooded. That's his community. But 2 weeks ago, he's been putting stories on Facebook. He's a very good storyteller. But 2 weeks ago, he posted this, and I'll quote him. He says, Dene called themselves all things in creation. Dene is a word of 2 words, dene and ne. De and ne, dene. De means the river that flows, and ne is Mother Earth. So people of the earth. Dene believed all things flows from Mother Earth, and therefore all are Dene. All things, the elements, earth, air, wind, and fire, are Dene. All animals, plants, are Dene. Everything in creation is Dene. In this belief, all Dene and things in creation, having had all their needs fulfilled, also fulfill the needs of one another. And Steve talked about being together. We need to be together in community. This reciprocity of creation is how the Creator fulfilled the needs of all Dene. And that's the end of his quote. So we, you and I, are earth. We are wind. We are water. This is us. Whole, one, not independent, but dependent and interrelated. My upbringing, and I suspect many of you, was in the Christian tradition. And in that Christian tradition, we constantly hear lessons about God within us, being one with the Creator. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was. When we really take time to digest that, we really can celebrate that we are one. We're not black and white. We're not Indigenous and Asian. We are not rich and poor. We are not homeless and wealthy. We are one. How do we see each other as the Creator sees us? And then how do we share our stories, our lives, in respectful, caring ways? Especially when the one we're looking at is not who we are, is not from our place. I suggest that our sense of identity is rooted in three things, three elements: our culture, our choices, and our genes. I think as we break down who we are, since we tend to like to pigeonhole things, we can put ourselves together with those three elements. The baby on, just since I told you about my kids, but the baby on the right is my daughter Etoile, who is now 30-something, when she was a newborn. And the hide on the left is a hide that she was tanning. Because there was only two of us and there were supposed to be four of us, I inserted this last night into the slides. And I think, Andrew, if you could hit return. I don't know if I can make it play from here. No, I can't. If you could hit return on the computer. This is a slideshow about the Berger Inquiry. It's only about 5 minutes long. But it'll give you an idea of what
Canada and the United States have a great appetite for oil and gas. That is why the government of Canada is considering this gas pipeline. But before The government decides what to do. They want to know what you think about it. That is why they have sent me here.
Chikweti nukulang kak chukwendo namhay atukwa ay kwikire yenchi nang kak United States ako Canada.
They said I was born in between Thunder River and Tree River. And I want to die there of old age, she said. But that Travier Lake, that's my lake, she said. She said that's my land around where I'm living now, she said. That's around Tree River and even around Travier Lake. Even you try to chase me away from there, she said, I wouldn't go, she said. This land was ours, she said. We were born in it. God gave it to us, she said. We didn't buy it.
Being an Indian means being able to understand and live with this world in a very special way. It means living with the land, with the animals, birds, and fish as though they were your sisters and brothers. It means seeing the land as an old friend that your father knew, your grandfather knew, indeed your people have always known.
One Chanwizra Goli, Zan Enjet, Drachan Goli, Chanwat Zahenjet, Jik Tak, Han Chan Shuk, Tin Honan, Lawat Ajajo, Lokakiki, the Chizo.
We use this land very much. It's a land where we have been born and brought up. Now, because we like our land, we don't want the lakes and the creeks and the rivers to be spoiled, and especially our caribou.
As you can see, when you flew in your plane to Old Crow, much of our land has no trees on it. The trees grow along the rivers and around the lakes. We know that it takes a tree many years to grow in this country. Some people say sometimes it's 200 years. Josh Berger, who is going to put out the forest fires, that will start if the pipeline breaks. We do not want them to tell us that the pipeline won't break. We have lived here long enough to see many things go wrong with white men projects. We know it will break someday, somehow.
People seem to wonder why the Eskimo or the people don't take the white man's word at face value anymore. Why, when he says he's going to drill an oil well and not spill any oil or make any mess, why they don't believe him anymore? Well, from my point of view, it goes way back, right back to when the Eskimo first seen the white man. Most of them were whalers. And the whaler wasn't very nice to the Eskimo. Just took all the whales they could get and never mind the results. Following the whalers, the white traders and the white trappers. The white traders took them for every cent they could get. You know the stories in every history book where you had to pile fur high as your gun. Those things were not fair. The native lived with it, damn well had to get that gun, to make a life easier for himself. And after them, after the white trappers and the fur traders, you have all the settlements, all the government people coming in and making settlements all over and telling the people what to do, what's best for them. Live here, live there. That place is no more good for you. Right here's your school. So they did. They all moved into the settlements. And for the 1950s and 1960s, they damn near starved. Most of them were on ration because they were not going out in the country anymore. These kids had to go to school. And then came the oil companies. First the seismographic outfits. And the Eskimo, like he did for the last 50 years and 60 years, he sat back and watched them. Couldn't do anything about it anyway. And he watched them plow up their land in the summertime, plow up their traps in the wintertime. What are you going to do about it? That cat is bigger than your mosquito or your dog team, you know. And then the oil companies. Well, the oil companies, I must say, of all of them so far that I've mentioned, seem to be have the most respect for the people and their ways. But it is too late. The people won't take a white man's word at his face value anymore. Because you fooled them too many times. You took everything you had and you gave them nothing. You took all the fur, took all the whales, killed all the polar bear with aircraft and everything and put a quota on top of that on top of him so he can't hunt polar bear when he feels like it anymore. All that he pays for. And now they want to drill out there. Now they want to build pipeline. And they say they're not going to hurt the country while they do it. They're going to let the Eskimo live his way. And for the Eskimo to believe now that the white man is not going to do any damage out there with this oil drilling and his oil wells, it's just about impossible. Because he hasn't proven himself, as far as I'm concerned, he hasn't proven himself worthy of being believed anymore.
I come in from my camp today. It's over 70 miles I traveled by skidoo today. Just to say a few words to you. For my land. Today sometime I coming down on that river. I just feel mad, you know. What's happening to us? Nobody knows what's happening to us. That's all I'm going to say. Thank
you. There's a couple of more things, but I just looked at the time and I see I've taken a lot of time. I'm sorry about that.
You're fine.
Do I have time to tell one more story?
Please.
I'd like to tell the story of Gabriel and I getting married because it's a good illustration for me of how different we are as husband and wife, and when you're trying to bring two cultures together in a family, the challenges that are faced. Gabriel's parents didn't speak English. They've both passed now. So we got married May 21st, 1977, so a couple of weeks we'll have our 45th anniversary. We decided that we would try and approach our wedding in as traditional way as possible, me being a white guy who didn't speak Tlincho. So I went off to her parents' home with a friend. His name was Joe Toby. Joe was a master at languages. He spoke 3 Dene languages, French and English. One day I just walked up to him and said, "Hey, Joe, I need a translator. Do you mind helping me out?" And he said, no, when? So we took off, went to Gabriel's parents. We walked in, and her mom and dad were there, and her 2 youngest sisters. And here's the scenario. Picture, we walk in, and there's a couch right next to the door. So Joe and I, me being closest to the door, sit down on the couch. There's a wood stove in the middle of the room. There's a kitchen counter in the back corner. In between, there's a table with chairs. There's an armchair to the left of the couch. And her 2 little sisters are sitting on a chair by the table, on one chair together. And her mom's kind of wandering around. She comes in. When you meet people in Dene culture, you don't say, "Hello, how are you?" You say, "Thank you." You reach out and shake their hand and say, "Merci, merci, thank you, thank you." You receive somebody for who they are, and you show gratitude. So Gabriel's mom came and thanked us. Her dad stayed put. He must have sensed something was coming. I muster up the courage, and I start my story of saying, "Well, Gabriel and I have been talking about getting married, and I came to seek and ask your permission." And Joel looks at me, and he looks at her parents, and he starts to translate. And then her dad says something back, and he says, "Well, we don't know you. Who are you? Who's your family? You're white." What we've seen is a bunch of white guys come into town, and they hook up with one of our young women, and they have a baby, and then the white guy disappears. I don't want that for my daughter. So, where's Gabriel? She should be here, part of this discussion. And he said, "Well, bring Gabriel back on Sunday, and we'll have a family meeting." So here's the interesting thing. In Clincho culture, it's not the parents who make the decision about a marriage. It's the clan. Aunts, uncles, older siblings, and parents and grandparents. So Sunday we come back, we go to Mass. After Mass, family meeting at Granny's house. We all take off to Granny's house, and they look at us and say, "Go home and wait." Oh. So we go home to her parents' place, and we wait and wait. And eventually someone comes back and says, "Aunts and uncles say it's okay. Grandparents have agreed. You can go ahead." So we start planning our wedding. This was in February, and we planned the wedding for May 21st. And May 19th, my father and stepmother come to Yellowknife, and we take them out to Gabriel's community to meet her parents. We walk in the door and shake the hand, say hello. And her dad says in Clincho to Gabriel, "Take them to your aunts. Take them to your aunts." And he really pressuring. Well, Aunt Elizabeth speaks English. So this is a good moment to really have the families connect. So we take off, load up the car, take my parents over to Aunt Elizabeth's house. We walk in, and Aunt Elizabeth, after saying hello and greeting us, starts telling the story of Gabriel from the family's perspective. Who is she? How they see her, why she's important to them. What her qualities are. And she finishes, and she says to my parents, in kind of, and by the way, Gabriel's dad showed up about 2 minutes after we got to Elizabeth. He must have jogged over, because we drove over, and he came in the door pretty quick after us. She looked at my parents and said, "What about him?" Kind of in a gruff tone. And that's Gabriel's dad. And that's my dad. My dad comes from an English background. Non-emotional, non-communicative, quiet. And you talked about your father or grandfather being a macho man. Well, in some ways, my dad, he didn't really express anything in terms of the kind of person he was. He just worked hard and supported his family. That was how he saw his world. And he stood there speechless, literally speechless. And I'm sitting there thinking, here goes our wedding, out the door. And my stepmother, Tina, God bless her, that's Tina. She is Dutch, and she lived across the street from us, and about 2.5 years, maybe 3 years after my mom died, my dad and her got married. So I knew her children. They're around the same age as I am. One about a year younger and one half a year older. And God bless her, because she stepped up to the plate and said, "Well, I'm not Pat's mother, but I lived across the street from him. And I can tell you, I knew his mom, and she would say this about him and this about him." And she told one particular story about me bringing home on Thanksgiving for a potluck supper about 60 young people from a conference that I was at when I was only supposed to bring home 10. I got to the conference, said, "Come to my place for dinner, we're having potluck." But I didn't keep track of who I was talking to. So I said, about 60 people showed up. My parents coped with it. Gabriel's dad never supported us getting married. He opposed it. He didn't feel it was right that his daughter, see, Gabriel is very important in the family because she's a reincarnation of her grandfather. So the permission that she got and I got to get married wasn't about me and her. It was that her aunts and uncles did not want to deny the interests of their grandfather, of the elder of their family. So they felt if denying Gabriel would be denying him, and they didn't want to do that. So they said yes, but her father wasn't in that place. And he kept saying no. In fact, the day of our marriage, he went to Gabriel 3 times privately, 3 times, and said, "Don't do this. Don't do this. Don't do this." And I can tell you my wife is stubborn, and she expressed her stubbornness that day, and we ended up getting married. Here's the beautiful moment of that whole day. It wasn't the marriage ceremony. It was after the marriage ceremony. We came out of the church, and you know how you line up and people shake your hands? Her father was the first one in the line. He came and shook my hand and said, in broken English, "My son, my son." I was now part of the family, and he treated me like a son from that day forward. Even though he didn't want me, he got me. But for me, you see, that story, as personal as it is, and there are my parents with my children. I think it illustrates how we can get locked into tunnel vision and we don't see the person because we haven't been willing to see who they really are, or we haven't heard their stories, so we don't know who they are. And the thing that happened with the Berger Inquiry, you see all these community people came forward to Berger and told them their story. And it was a remarkable experience because it actually changed them. It changed them. During the Berger Inquiry, it went on for 2.5 years. And I'm going to end with this, and I thank you very much for tolerating me, but I want to use this because I think it really illustrates so well the importance of story. When the Berger Inquiry started, people referred to themselves as Native and Indian. So when Berger first started to go to the communities, this is what he heard. Klavik was the first community he went to. Klavik was a mixture of Dene, or Indians, Métis, and Inuit, or at that time they called themselves Eskimos. So you see here in this chart, in Aklavik, the word Dene, we heard what Roy said about being Dene, wasn't heard. This was in April 1975. In the time we were there, in the 3 days we were there, we heard the word Indian 36 times, the word Métis 8 times, the word Native 32 times, and the word Eskimo 42 times. So it was a mixed community. All those peoples were part of that community. End of May, a month, 2 months later, we went to Hay River. It's been on the news. It's a white community. It's a kind of industrial community, partly mining, partly shipping. Of course, Dene wasn't heard at all. Indian was heard 155 times, Métis 10 times. There's a lot of Métis people in the community. Native 195 times, and Eskimo not at all. No Inuit in that community. Then we went to Fort Franklin, June 24th, almost a month later. We were there for 3 days. Fort Franklin was a community of about 300 people at the time. The word Dene came up for the first time. So this is 6 months into the inquiry. We finally hear the word Dene, the term the people from their own language use for themselves. The word Indian 49, Native 123, Métis 3. I'm going to go jump down to Fort Good Hope. Fort Good Hope is the neighboring community of Fort Franklin, or Delaney. Two months later, almost. Fort Good Hope is about the same size of community. Very similar communities. We heard the word Dene 230 times. So all of a sudden, there was this exponential curve of how people identified themselves. And here's what happened between Fort Franklin and Fort Good Hope. The Indian Brotherhood of the Northwest Territories had their annual assembly, and they changed their name to the Dene Nation. I argue, and I believe deeply, one of the primary reasons they were enabled to do that was because Thomas Berger came and he listened to their stories. He validated who they were. He heard them, he acknowledged them, he valued them. And in doing so, they heard each other. And they took ownership of who they were in a vernacular sense. And they abandoned the colonial term of Indian and Native and began using their own language, Dene. And that trend continued to evolve. Thank you for your patience. What happens now?
Well, I guess I'll make just a couple of quick statements about how incredibly profound and life-affirming your talk was. I just wanted to comment on a couple of things really quickly that struck me. You mentioned earlier of the violence that occurs when we're not heard. That really struck home with me in the thinking of, there's this term called black fatigue. And it's the weariness, another term similar called weathering, where the constant having to share our stories over and over and over again, where we're forced to request hat-in-hand validation of our personhood. It's not a real exchange. It's let me explain this to you one more time so you can tell me why I'm wrong and you're right, or why something is racist when it's not, or something is not racist when it is. And that causes a great deal of fatigue and stress, culturally, individually, and it is a form of assault to not be heard. So that on top of that, the violence that's being perpetrated upon you, then you have to deal with a term that's come out a lot in the States, white fragility, right? So we spend all of our time tending to your fragility, not you, the collective you, in that I have to make sure you're okay so that you don't kill me, come after me, take from me, whatever it is. This thing where, and especially when we talk about the complicity of white women in upholding systemic racism and white supremacy, in that while there's this fight for equality, but still the refusal to relinquish white skin privilege, right? We want the benefits of it, but then there comes with that toxic masculinity, male dominance and so forth. Well, we'll pay that price for the economic benefit, for the privilege that white skin gives me, but yet I want these rights and I'm oppressed. And so what I said earlier is to the point of done with that, because when you don't hear me, it is a form of violence. It is, I'm being re-traumatized over and over again. So I just wanted to just thank you for bringing that out and just how important that is. And I guess my quick question to you is that when you speak in terms of the violence of not hearing or not listening, what does that mean to you?
The violence of not hearing or listening. It's, I suppose, I would use the term oppressive. It's oppression. It's denial. Because when we aren't open to hearing someone's story, to listening to who they are, to seeing them for who they really are as Dene, a part of creation, then we're not only denying them, we're denying us, myself, being denied. So it's full denial.
It's like extermination.
in some sense,
Some
yes.
sense.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, it's...
Not literally,
so it's,
but yeah.
No, not literally, but as a parent, and I'm sure any parent who's, when their kids were small, could reflect back to not listening to your child. So easy to do because you're busy doing something. And they come, and I've been watching this happen with my grandchildren, actually, and their parents. And I sit back being amused by it, but what does that say to the child? Not important. You don't count. But if we step back and look at who we are in creation, we do count. So we need to work at always being affirming. You know, there's a psalm, Psalm 139. David talks about never getting away from God. God was with him in his mother's womb. If he climbs the highest mountain, God's there. Can't get rid of you because he's one with God. We are one with God. So when we separate ourselves from others through our biases, we're separating ourselves, i.e. our souls, from our creation. And that's really the core of denial.
And I mean, we could talk for an hour, but one last thing. What I loved when you talk about language, the innate language, how names and places have significance in just a word. And I think one of the shortcomings of the English language is that because it's a mutt language, that words really have no meaning. Names have no meaning. Where you'd said one daughter, dancing son. In so many cultures where the child isn't even named for a certain period of time, to start to see the characteristics and traits of the child before the child is named. And he talked about people, how they're defined within their land by where they are, people of the edge. How do we, and then you use terms when we talked about when we encounter one another, how important it is that we appreciate and apprehend, but appreciate is not, oh, I hear you or I feel good about and I'm affirming you. Appreciate means that you are taking hold of what you're hearing. Apprehending, you grab hold, you take, you hold of, and then it feeds into your very soul. And so because of the limitations of the English language, what are ways that you think we can better utilize this limited language, a limited way of understanding name, place, person, when we try to restore and rebuild?
Yeah, I think on top of what you just said, Stephen, the other challenge we have is that we're primarily urban people. So we're disconnected from land. And Indigenous people are following that path as well. They're becoming more and more disconnected from their territories. And they admit it, they know that. And they're losing their languages, which really is the way they stay connected. So my children don't, one daughter has learned to speak it, another daughter's learning, but none of them are, except for the one daughter is fluent in the Dene language. Ironically, my wife couldn't speak English until they moved into the community, so she wouldn't have to go to residential school. And you see what happened with her was, in our children, every time we had a child, I'd say, speak to them in Clinchal. And she'd start. But because of the social impact she experienced as a child about speaking her language in day school, not residential school, in day school, it traumatized her that as an adult, she couldn't use her language with her children because we weren't in that environment. We were in an urban setting. So how do we see one another and help each other fulfill who we are when we're so disconnected? I don't know. Any suggestions?
Are we in the Q&A session now?
You know what?
or
That's a good transition.
Yeah.
Yes, we can be in the Q&A.
Because I don't know how to answer you, Steve. I don't, quite honestly. I know, we hear lots about reconciliation right now. We live in a time of perpetual chatter about reconciliation. But we don't know how to do it. We really don't know how to do it.
Does anyone have a question for Patrick or Steve?
Way over in the corner.
Way over in the corner.
Here, I want to bring the mic because there are people that are listening.
Yeah, we're all,
And
can't
they
hear
can
well.
your question.
Oh, well, actually, it's just when you were speaking, a thought came to me about belonging to the land and that, because I'm from Ireland, right? So I'm here, right?
I can hear an
Ireland,
accent.
and I'm happy here. But, the thought came to me because we were just reading it the other morning. God said to Abraham, "Get thee out of thy country."
I'm sorry?
God said to Abraham, "Get you out of your country and from your kindred, and I will show you a land," bringing him to the promised land. And it really doesn't matter where we're from, what color we are, whatever, because this earth is just for us to live so that we can live more like Christ and be more like Christ. And he has a better land that we're all going on to, all of us. So to me, it doesn't really matter. The God I loved and served in Ireland is the God I love and serve here in Canada. And we can go, in our belief, we've been to Africa, we've sat down in the same meeting in a Sunday morning in a home, black people, coloured people, white people. We've sat down and we've all had fellowship together. And it's only the love of God will ever bring that about. Like last night we listened about the sheet coming down and all manner from every corner, that sheet, north, south, east and west. Didn't matter, like you just mentioned too, rich, poor, black, white, it didn't matter. They were all in that sheet. And God said to Peter that day, don't call any of that common or unclean, what God was working with. And he's working with us all. And I myself don't even think of people's colour, because if they're serving God and they love God, we're all one.
Go ahead.
So, your name, ma'am? Iris?
Yeah.
Conceptually, I agree with you. What I would say is that too often, love of God or adherence to faith is used as an avoidance mechanism for dealing with the pain and sorrows of an individual or people, because then you can just say, we're all God's children, we all love one another. That is very true. However, in the world in which we live, belonging, ownership, community is defined by power and authority. And so within the context of we are all the children of God, and we spoke about, and Patrick spoke about this, but at the same time, he was very clear-cut on the importance of acknowledging identity and how one's particular specific identity and humanity factors into what they contribute to humanity in general. So that when we say love of God trumps identity, we're falling back to a sort of neutrality and default position of that is created, unfortunately, by white colonialist philosophical thought, that there is this generic place where we all as God's children can come. As my grandmother, great-grandmother used to say, God made me this way for a reason. And if he wanted us all to have one, tone of skin and speak one language, well, he would have done that. The tale of the Tower of Babel is more than just, it's not about God being afraid that man was going to build a tower so tall that it was going to challenge God. God was never in fear. That story speaks more to what can happen or go wrong when in unison humanity decides that it is God or like God, in the arrogance of being like God, and not understanding our rightful place within creation, within the universe as God's creation, okay? And so the diversity of language has as much about telling a story of the fullness of community. And so what I would say is that bringing God's love to an individual, regardless of who they are, where they're from, is obviously a wonderful thing. I would just go one step further as to say that it is incumbent upon all of us to take that next step, to see the uniqueness in each individual, and championing, validating, and celebrating that which makes them unique from you. And in that is how we build the beloved community. But I don't disagree with you at all, Iris. I'm saying that be careful not to fall into the trap of neutrality that erases some and empowers others.
Yes.
Just in response to that, I think a practical working out of this, we had a conversation with our son last night, who is coach of the Queen's University men's volleyball team, and he's been looking at the top Canadian pick to play on his team at Queen's. White kid, very, very talented, and Gabe has been working with him to get the very best marks to get into Queen's, which is, a difficult challenge. Anyway, turns out this boy was right on the bubble. And he was turned down. Gabe has been courting this guy for 4.5 years. They have the university has been working very hard to become a more diverse, less white and white privileged place that it has been in Canada for many years. That decision of the university to be that way has prevented this boy now from being on the university men's volleyball team, because they are trying as a university to become more diverse. A painful decision for Gabriel, who's been wanting to have this kid play, but this is a boy of privilege. He's a white boy who's had every opportunity to get ahead. And the university is saying, we need to change the story. We need to create opportunities for people of color to also enjoy all of the good things about Queen's University. And it means this boy may not be the one who gets to go ahead and play. So it's very difficult, and you'd say, wow, well, why couldn't they make an exception for him? And I think someone at the top is saying, no more exceptions. If we want to change the story, we have to act on it. We have to take action.
So I'll quickly jump in, Mr. Patrick may have something to say. What you're talking about, again, so even in the effort to diversify, we have an instance where domination or greed or extraction rules the day. So it's not justice and equality at the expense of Gabriel. It's not, no. It is we having to attack and deconstruct the myth of scarcity. That there are only so many scholarships we can give. And if we're going to help this black kid over here, well, I'm sorry, you're going to just have to lose out. No. See, that is the element of control that has kept us all at each other's throats, so that even though your son evolves to a good point to say, this is right, I understand it, even though it hurts, you've created a martyr unnecessarily. How about this? How about saying, rather than spending X number of millions of dollars on this building we don't need, or rather than, overpaying, administrators over here, meanwhile professors are working on garbage wages, or setting up systems where they become adjunct, where you don't even have to hire them and they can be fired at will. I don't think there's anyone in here who knows anything about David Goer, you know nothing about that. I mean, so this myth of scarcity that's used to control resources for the benefit of a privileged few. There is no reason on God's green earth why you cannot diversify and create a justice-based system that also includes Gabriel. It's a matter of will. That's it. It's a matter of desire, nothing else. And so we all as a group, we have to really literally destroy that kind of thinking, that expansionist, efficiency is king, growth, unfettered growth, untethered growth. We have to eliminate that from our thinking and not be afraid of being called communist or this or that. And again, that's a system too. I'm talking about, we're talking about living in a common, community-based system, whereas myself as a person of faith, as a Christian, I believe that's what the gospel teaches us. But even within the teaching of the gospel, power dynamics still fall into play, and we just have to be wary of that and reject that thinking.
That's helpful. Yeah, thank you.
Boy, big issues that each of us struggle with, I think. Each of us struggle with. How do we be equal with our brother? Not just talk about it, but be it. And colonialism is a heavy, heavy burden to carry. And we carry it. And somehow we have to own it and heal it as a society, because it's been totally destructive. I hate to be so outrageous in my comment, but colonialism has been. You look around the world, every place colonialism has taken root, and it doesn't matter where it came from. When a people, and we're seeing it in the worst way right now in Ukraine, when another people or another political system decides that they have the right to someone else's place or to someone else's person, as happened with black people, the sins are visited onto the third and fourth generation. So we're still dealing with those sins. And we have to work at finding a healing mechanism. And others that have been violated, or us in some cases have been violated, like the experience you were just talking about, Dennis, we also need to experience forgiveness within ourselves so that there can be reconciliation. It's not an easy path we have to journey. But I firmly believe listening, hearing one another will get us to the other side, will get us to the point of health and equality and forgiveness.
As an African American, I have to do the hard thing of extending grace and forgiveness, and being right is not enough. Even if I'm justified in my anger, my righteous anger, part of restoration, especially in a truth and reconciliation model, which we're working through on my job. I mean, as a manager of diversity at my place of work, create that process. And what that means is that if retribution is your end goal, you will not be satisfied. You will not be made whole. Healing has to be the goal. And there will be scars when you heal, right? Mm-hmm. Unavoidable. And the mark will always be there. And when you're repairing the body, even though you've repaired it, it will never be the same again as it once was. But that doesn't mean it can't be better, and it doesn't mean that you can't be whole. You just won't be the same. And we, whether it be women of color, white women, men of color, working class people who are every bit as exploited as anyone else, but they don't realize it, and they have anger, but that anger is misplaced, I believe. We have to accept that restoration is not revenge. That's the next step to take.
I want to thank you both so much for sharing your stories today. There's been such good meat come out of these conversations, and I totally agree with you that it's our responsibility to listen to the stories, to hear the stories, and to learn the truths of everyone that has experienced a different Canada or America than what you have, what the Indigenous people of our country have had. There's so many opportunities for us to learn, to read the stories of other people, and to hear the stories that you've told us today. And I just wanted to recommend a few books that I've read in the last year that I thought were incredibly helpful for my understanding. One, The Skin We're In by Desmond Cole, who is a Black Canadian journalist, and it is the story of his life as he experienced it in 2017. And I know it seems like a lot of times in Canada we think we're very altruistic and very open and diverse, and that there's not such an experience of racism, but his story gives us some sense of what it's like to be a Black Canadian today. Another that I've read is From the Ashes by Jessie Thistle. My story of being Métis, homeless, and finding my way. It's a really powerful autobiographical novel. And another one by Katharina Vermette, which is fiction, The Strangers. I think there's two in that series. I've only read the second one, again about living as a Métis in Winnipeg, I believe is where it takes place. These all help me to understand the perspective of other people that live in this place we call Canada, how they experience it. And another one that I find is what is very helpful for us to understand how we do experience white privilege, and the term that Stephen referred to, it's actually called White Fragility, is the name of the book. Why It's So Hard for White People to Talk About Racism by Robin DiAngelo. And it's a bit more, I would say, academic. Would you agree with me, Stephen?
Yeah, it is.
It is, but it blows your mind. It blew my mind, and I just thought I would share that with you, because opportunities for us, as Stephen said, it's our job to learn. It's not Stephen's job to explain to us this history and how it's affecting everyone still today. So
Thank you for that. And that was one of the 3 books I was going to recommend, White Fragility. There's a book called Black Fatigue. That's written by, I think her name's Mary Winters, a scholar who deals with teaching diversity, equity, and inclusion issues. Mary Frances Winters, Frances with an ES. And then How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi, which is seminal writing about the difference between being not racist and anti-racist. Not racist meaning I personally don't hold these feelings, as opposed to anti-racist saying I acknowledge the racism and I will do all that I can to fight it. And so thank you so much for this and this wonderful opportunity, and it's been a blessing to be in your presence.
We're going to have another session this afternoon, but in between, there is lunch available down in McCabe's. And Jenny made some beautiful egg salad sandwiches from those lovely chickens that you saw as you came up the drive. So I hope everyone can stay.
Can I just, since we were talking about books, I just wanted to mention anything by Richard Wamagis. Embers is a beautiful book if you haven't come across that. He's Ojibwe. Another book is called Reconciliation. Tony Pennicott, former politician here in Canada, has written a very good book on reconciliation, political reconciliation. And I brought 10 copies of my book, Stories Told. It's about the Berger Inquiry, if anybody's interested.
I believe it's downstairs, right?
I've got them right here, but I can take them downstairs.
Great.
They will be there.
Excellent. Well, thank you again, both, so much.
Thanks.
We have parting gifts, too.
I love swag.
There you go.
Oh, boy. Yours is... They're all different.
Oh.
Betty selected